method of composing with 12 tones grew out of a necessity. In the last 100 years, the concept of harmony has changed tremendously through the development of chromaticism. The idea that one basic tone, the root, dominated the construction of chords and regulated their succession, the concept of tonality, had to develop first into the concept of extended tonality. Very soon it became doubtful whether such a root still remained the center to which every harmony and harmonic succession must be referred. Furthermore, it became doubtful whether a tonic appearing at the beginning, at the end, or at any other point really had a constructive meaning. Richard Wagner's harmony had promoted a change in the logic and constructive power of harmony. One of its consequences was the so-called impressionistic use of harmonies, especially by Debussy. His harmonies, without constructive meaning, often served the coloristic purpose of expressing moods and pictures. Moods and pictures, though extra-musical, thus became constructive elements, incorporated into the musical functions. They produced a sort of emotional comprehensibility. In this way, tonality was already dethroned in practice, if not in theory. This alone would perhaps not have caused a radical change in compositional technique. However, such a change became necessary when there occurred simultaneously a development which ended in what I call the Emancipation of Dissonance. The ear had gradually become acquainted with a great number of dissonances, and so had lost the fear of their sense-interrupting effect. One no longer expected preparations of Wagner's dissonances or resolutions of Strauss's discords. One was not disturbed by Debussy's non-functional harmonies or by the harsh counterpoint of later composers. The state of affairs led to a freer use of dissonances comparable to classical composers' treatment of diminished seventh chords, which could precede and follow any other harmony, consonant or dissonant, as if there were no dissonance at all. What distinguishes dissonances from consonances is not a greater or lesser degree of beauty, but a greater or lesser degree of comprehensibility. In my harmony book, I presented the theory that dissonant tones appear later among the overtones, for which reason the ear is less intimately acquainted with them. This phenomenon does not justify such sharply contradictory terms as concord and discord. Closer acquaintance with the more remote consonances, the dissonances, that is, gradually eliminated the difficulty of comprehension, and finally admitted not only the emancipation of dominant and other seventh chords, diminished sevenths, and augmented triads, but also the emancipation of Wagner's, Strauss's, Mussorgsky's, Debussy's, Mahler's, Puccini's, and Reger's more remote dissonances. The term emancipation of the dissonance refers to its comprehensibility, which is considered equivalent to the consonance's comprehensibility. A style based on this premise treats dissonances like consonances and renounces a tonal center. By avoiding this establishment of a key, modulation is excluded, since modulation means leaving an established tonality and establishing another tonality. Formerly, the harmony had served not only as a source of beauty, but more important, as a means of distinguishing the features of the form. For instance, only a consonance was considered suitable for an ending. Establishing functions demanded different successions of harmonies, then roving functions, a bridge, a transition, demanded other successions than a coda. Harmonic variation could be excluded intelligently and logically only with due consideration of the fundamental meaning of the harmonies. Fulfillment of all these functions, comparable to the effect of punctuation in the construction of sentences, of subdivision into paragraphs, and of fusion into chapters, could scarcely be assured with chords whose constructive values had not as yet been explored. Hence it seemed at first impossible to compose pieces of complicated organization or of great length. A little later I discovered how to construct larger forms by following a text or a poem. The differences in size and shape of its parts and the change in character and mood were mirrored in the shape and size of the composition, its dynamics and tempo, figuration and accentation, instrumentation and orchestration. Thus the parts were differentiated as clearly as they had formerly been by the tonal and structural functions of the harmony. Formerly, the use of fundamental harmony had been theoretically regulated through recognition of the effects of root progressions. This practice had grown into a subconsciously functioning sense of form, which gave a real composer an almost somnambulistic sense of security in creating with utmost precision the most delicate distinctions of formal elements. Whether one calls oneself a conservative or revolutionary, whether one composes in conventional or progressive manner, whether one tries to imitate old styles or is destined to express new ideas, whether one is a good composer or not, one must be convinced of the infallibility of one's own fantasy, and one must believe in one's own inspiration. Nevertheless, the desire for a conscious control of the new means and forms will arise in every artist's mind, and he will wish to know consciously the laws and rules which govern the forms which he has created as in a dream. Strongly convincing as this dream may have been, the conviction that these new sounds obey the laws of nature and of our manner of thinking, the conviction that order, logic, comprehensibility and form cannot be present without obedience to such laws, forces the composer along the road of exploration. He must find, if not laws or rules, at least ways to justify the dissonant character of these harmonies and their successions.